Most unlikely of villains, smooths of brain and for pause. Does it talk? Does it know how? Does it bottle? Does it meow? In the lair of the cerebral bore, has shown so much more. When you go brains at the door.
Welcome back to Rebroadcast. I'm your host, Jason, from the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. Today I'm bringing you another rebroadcast. This is the second in a series of shows that Rob from the Down in the Heap podcast did with me, discussing the Universal monster movies. And in here we discuss Frankenstein. So if you didn't hear it when it was first aired on the Down in the Heap podcast, buckle in. It's a great conversation, and I hope you get something out of it.
Avast me hearties, heave to and prepare to be boarded. In old school games, life is cheap. Don't be a blasted dope. Bring your pole, your oil, and your rope, and try not to go down in a heap to Davy Jones' locker.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Down in a Heap podcast. I'm your host Rob, podcasting to you live from beautiful Northeast Minneapolis. There at the top of the show you heard something new, and that's for two reasons, I guess. One, I just discovered this morning that Anchor deleted my library of segments before like January 14th, 2020. So, poof, there goes my theme song and a bunch of the Thundar sound bites that I had stored, and other things too. So I re-recorded my theme song with a pirate accent in honor of the guest who joins me today, Jason of Nerds RPG Variety Cast, because he did a whole episode speaking like a pirate on Speak Like a Pirate Day. So we got together a couple days ago and recorded via Zoom a conversation about the next Universal monster movie that we had promised long ago and never did, and that you can place the blame entirely on my part there. So I hope you enjoy this. Be warned, there's some confounding of names with characters and even characters within one another, because it is a little bit confusing. So sometimes we refer to a character by the character in the movie, sometimes by the actor who plays the character. And because they changed the name of the main character, Victor Frankenstein in the book, to Henry Frankenstein, and then introduce a secondary character named Victor, it just makes things kind of confusing. Be warned, it's a couple of older gentlemen who maybe don't have the strongest of memories anymore. Well, I can only speak for myself. And there's also some probably irritating clanking noises as I periodically lift my glass with ice, and it gets picked up on the mic, so sorry about that. But without further ado, here's me and Jason talking about Frankenstein. Enjoy. So, hey everyone, welcome back to Down in a Heap. It's been a long time since we've done this, but we're talking about the guy that took a year and a half to do a deep dive into a 128-page rule set BX. But we scratched the surface and talked about Dracula. And now Jason Connerly from Nerds RPG Variety Cast has graciously agreed to join me again to talk about the next Universal monster movie, Frankenstein. Welcome to the show, Jason. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me back, Rob. I'm really excited to talk about this. This I guess it still is, but this was definitely my favorite as a kid. Frankenstein. I can remember renting this on Betamax, going to my aunt and uncle's in the summer, and they had a little video store near them. They were in rural Delaware, and but they had a Betamax player, and we would, a little gas station had some films you could rent, and this was one of the ones we rented over and over and over. And,
cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. I think the first of the Universal monster movies I ever saw was Creature from the Black Lagoon. And that might be why it remains one of my favorites. But Frankenstein is definitely, I don't know, it's that or The Mummy are my two favorites from the series. And Boris Karloff is my favorite actor from the series. In fact, I named the first D&D character I ever rolled up. I named Boris in honor of Boris Karloff. So Boris the Elf. I don't think I ever played Boris the Elf, but he's the first character I ever rolled up a BX Elf.
That's almost funny because Boris Karloff wasn't a real tall guy or a real big guy.
No.
They built him up for this role. He was shorter than Clive. What was his last? I don't have all the names.
Colin Clive?
Was it Colin Clive or Clive? Anyway, he was shorter than the gentleman that played Henry Frankenstein is
Henry Frankenstein.
Yeah. Colin Clive. Yeah, he was actually Karloff was shorter than Clive was. They put him in those boots and all the stuff, and
they put him in those Gene Simmons boots, and
those boots were 13. They were 13 pounds each.
Oh my God! No wonder he lurched around. And didn't they have some kind of rig that stiffened his frame and stuff too, and he could actually kind of lean forward in those boots and stuff too? And
they did. They were designed so he could kind of lean forward, but all this was super heavy. And this was like his first. He was in a lot of roles before this, but this is the role that really made Boris Karloff. And he was kind of a starving like literally a starving actor up to this point. And he was physically. He missed the premiere of this because he needed back surgery. And imagine back surgery in the 30s, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about it's bad today, but imagine back then. And we'll get to that probably when we talk about the end of the movie, maybe what caused the back surgery. But so he was physically not crippled, but he suffered physical, back injury and stuff for the rest of his life from filming this role.
Yep. Yeah, it took a lot out of him. And I mean, the makeup by Jack Pierce is outstanding, especially given the period and stuff. And it's become, of course, the iconic look of Frankenstein because let's talk about it now. The film obviously doesn't follow the book by Mary Shelley,
right?
Very, very closely. I mean, it has the general themes and stuff, but there's a lot of things where it diverges, and where the film has actually become, I think, in pop culture, become more of the archetypes and iconography of Frankenstein is almost derived more, and maybe it's not a surprise that a visual medium would have more of a lasting impact, but the hunchback assistant, the electrical equipment in the laboratory going off, and the storm brewing for the creation scene, and Karloff's appearance and stuff. Those are all kind of what people think of, or at least people of our generation think of when we think of Frankenstein. I don't know, maybe other people who saw like the De Niro Frankenstein first or something. I don't know, but
no, I feel bad for those people. There's no question. Now, a lot of the things in this movie, though, where I don't think there's any question that more people have seen this film than have read the book.
Yes.
More people alive today, let's say, have seen the film. But the film takes a whole lot from plays that were done in the late 1890s, early 1900s. Edison made a Frankenstein. I don't know if you've ever seen Edison's Frankenstein.
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's on YouTube, the whole thing. Yeah, you can watch, or what footage there is. Yeah, it's interesting. It's actually not bad considering it's like 1910. But this takes a lot from the play. So things like the I think the assistant came in during the assistant I know came in during the play.
Yep.
The name was changed from Victor. He's Victor Frankenstein in the book. He's changed to Henry in the play. And that's possibly because of post World War I. They don't, and that, like, this isn't Germany in the film, because this might be the first nondescript universal Eastern European, country that they use. But with the assistant, the reason they bring the assistant in, because in the book he doesn't have an assistant,
right?
But you can't on film and on the stage. I guess you could do inner monologue on the stage, but really you need to talk to somebody, explain your plans to somebody, and that's why the assistant's there.
Yep. And I read too that Fritz, the assistant, not Igor. Igor comes later in the series, but Fritz in the plays was mute, and they obviously in the James Whale production he has a speaking role. It's Dwight Fry from Dracula, who played Renfield, and in Dracula he plays the assistant Fritz, and I guess there's another corollary what you're saying here too, where it's derived from a screen a stage production, and much like Dracula as well, the script came from a stage production rather than actually taking it directly from the novel. So
right.
So
and
both of these
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's right. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and Fry will return as the assistant in later films as well, which is kind of interesting. This same year, I know I've asked you this before, and this is a little bit of a tangent. I apologize. Have you seen the original the 31 Maltese Falcon?
Yes.
Dwight Fry's in that. He's
really?
He's a Gunsel in that. In that.
He's the Gunsel in that? I don't remember that.
Yeah.
I'll have to rewatch it. I haven't watched that one for a long time.
Yeah, but Dwight Fry is in a lot. He pops up in very interesting places.
Huh.
Yeah.
And when he died, he was working as I think an airplane mechanic or something during the war, and died. It sounds like he died from exhaustion, just like because he was trying to maintain his movie career and pull a shift, or probably a extended shift, building airplanes. I think it was for Boeing or something, but probably helping in the war effort. Well, like everyone else, or so many people were during the war. So
right. There's something else. I know what else I wanted to say about the other interesting thing they did in the play that they do here, and they kind of try to do in the Hammer movies, but I don't think the Universal movies played this aspect up after this movie. Was in the play, from what I understand, they played up more of the idea that the monster is like a dark image of Frankenstein. So we can't call him Dr. Frankenstein because he was never a doctor, because he dropped out of school, right? He never actually got his PhD. So Henry and the monster, he was never called Adam in the movie, so he's just the monster. But so Henry and the monster kind of like dark, not Jekyll and Hyde per se, but they're like dark images of each other, right? And they play, and in the plays, I guess what they did is the actors would for a few weeks or a few months, they'd play one role and then they'd switch. So the Frankenstein and the monster role, they'd switch back and forth. So they play both roles. And you kind of see in this film, and especially like there in the windmill at the end with the wheel or the mill, whatever it is, that wheel, and like you see the two of them looking at each other. Yeah, there are places in this film where you can see they're doing that aspect, like, of each other.
Sure.
But I don't think Universal played that up after this. But
no. And of course, in the book too, the monster was very verbose, and in this first installment of Frankenstein, Boris Karloff doesn't have any lines. He has vocalizations, but it's mainly pantomime that he does, and he's great at it. I mean, he has a great acting performance in this. I think most of the acting in this is quite good. I mean, you see, like we talked, Renfield or Dwight Fry is a carryover from Dracula, but also Edward Van Sloan comes over and it plays Dr. Waldman. You've got Colin Clive, who James Whale kind of handpicked him, and Mae Clark is love interest Elizabeth. They both were on films that James Whale did before Frankenstein. What are they? Waterloo Bridge, and I can't remember the other one now. It's gonna haunt me. Anyway, Colin Clive, I thought, I mean, he's got a voice that's very distinctive and resonant, and especially in the iconic "It's Alive" sequence, he just kind of knocks that one out of the park with his kind of maniacal ravings and stuff. It's
and for supporting actors, you have like Frederick Kerr as the Baron Frankenstein, who's he's a small part, but I love the performance he brings as the Baron. I just love that role. And I'll tell you who's really good in this, that I think is much better than in The Bride, is Michael Mark, who plays Ludwig, Little Maria's father, the father of the little girl. He's really good in this, and he'll return to the series later. Actually, later on he's in what's he in? He's in a number of the other movies. He's in Son of Frankenstein. He's in House of Frankenstein, and then he's in a personal favorite of mine, which is not a Universal movie, but Roger Corman's Wasp Woman.
Wasp Woman.
he's in that, but he does a really great job as her father in this, I think. But the Baron Frankenstein just brings a animation to that role, and he just inhabits that aristocracy, kind of landed aristocracy thing just perfectly. You know,
it's got a sweet smoking jacket and like chapeau and stuff, and sports a huge pipe. He's a wine snob. He's got it all.
Yeah, he does. I really like his performance. I think he's really good. I like the Burgermeister in this one too. I always love the Burgermeisters in these movies. I think that's such a great.
And it's funny that so this whole kind of like Germany, not Germany kind of setting that they have. I mean, obviously the names Fritz and Burgermeister and Frankenstein and Victor, because there's even though Frankenstein's name isn't Victor Frankenstein, it's Henry Frankenstein, there's a person who's kind of a love interest, kind of forms the third leg of a love triangle with Elizabeth, named Victor. And he's by John Bowles, I think is the actor's name.
Yes, John Bowles plays Victor Mortensen. Yeah, he's kind of he's trying to horn in on Henry's fiance there a little bit. That's
the very first scene with Elizabeth. He makes his intentions known, and Elizabeth kind of keeps him at arm's length, but then later on too, Frankenstein almost acknowledges this by saying, "I put her in your care. You know, if anything happens to me." So,
before. I'm sorry. I don't know where you're going. There were a couple other notes.
Segue, but go ahead.
Well, were we going to segue into the film or something away from them?
Nope. By all means, go ahead.
Well, the reason I say is because there were a couple other things I wanted to hit before we actually got into the film itself. Casting wise and even director wise, Lugosi was the first choice.
Right.
They wanted Lugosi to play the monster, and he didn't want to do it. And there's stories why, which may be apocryphal, may not be. But and then Flory, I didn't write his name down, but the director of the Murders of the Rue Morgue was going to be the director, but he and Lugosi were given the Murders of the Rue Morgue as consolation for not doing this.
Yep.
The other thing I have noted here, and this will probably come up, but this along with Dracula really laid the foundation for the horror film, the modern horror film. Yep. Dracula for your monster tale, and this is your cautionary tale, your moral tale, right? Yep. This wasn't the first cautionary tale in film by any means, but I think this is the one that your other horror movies build off of. Really, you see because you really feel like you mentioned the makeup and the acting, and Karloff is able to what's so great about Jack Pierce's makeup here, and I think this is probably the best monster makeup of all these movies by far, is you can really see Karloff's acting through the makeup. you know, and whether it's, and even like with his hands and his gestures, but with his face, the makeup is designed in such a way you can really, really see what he's doing, you know, and he does a great job with it.
Yeah. And from what I read something that Karloff had a dental plate that he'd take out and was able to he was already pretty gaunt, but he was able to kind of suck in that side of his face to make him even look more corpse-like or whatever. So he had more kind of like a sunken appearance because of that. So
yeah, it was. He did a great job. But okay, well, go ahead. Now that I've ruined your segue, go ahead.
No. So this was filmed in 1931, same year that Dracula was released, and as we said, James Whale was tapped to be the director. It picks up right with in the graveyard scene where Frankenstein and Fritz, his assistant, are observing a burial, and I love the grave digger. They have this. It's not real long, but it's probably about a minute where they just show after the mourners leave, and Frankenstein and Fritz are kind of waiting with bated breath to be able to get at the body, but they show this extended sequence of the gravedigger like spitting in his hands, filling in the grave, patting it down, you know, like hardening it with the back of his shovel, lighting a match and having a smoke, and then he walks off, you know, and then they have at it. But it's almost like that sequence really like cements the fact that this is a dead body that they're digging up. You know, it's not just an everyday kind of thing or something. But so they exhume the corpse.
During that, one thing, so there's a number of things in this movie that are really symbolic. And one of those is during that scene, that first shovel of dirt. So Henry Frankenstein, Clive, also helps dig the body up. And in the first shovel full of dirt he throws, there's a Grim Reaper statue there in the background, and he throws the dirt right in the Grim Reaper's face. Like,
oh, right.
You know, that's, you know, very symbolic, as in he's going to conquer death. And, you know, so.
And that Grim Reaper statue too is almost this feel of this like faux European setting where it's Germany, not Germany. No one speaks with an accent except for Waldman, and that's because it's Victor Van Sloan playing it, who has an accent, and he calls in one scene. He calls Frankenstein Herr Frankenstein, and he calls Elizabeth Fraulein, but that's really the only German in it. But there's no, like, aside from the laboratory crazy stuff, there's no like telephone or telegraph or trains or any kind of like modern
with one
stuff.
exception.
Is there a car?
No, not really. No, in fact, you see carts. In fact, they load the coffin on a cart, if I remember right. And when they capture, or no, I'm thinking of the Bride, where they capture the monster. But that was my only note about Clark, was that she looked too contemporary. I think her look, I think everything had that kind of nondescript late 19th century look, but I think she looked too contemporary, to be honest. I think her look with her hair and her clothes, sometimes she looked a lot more. And when I say contemporary, I'm talking 1930 contemporary, but she looked contemporary compared to everybody else in the film. She did a great job acting, but I think for some reason, I don't know why, but they didn't change her look. I know I've heard that during the 30s and 40s, a lot of times actors provided their own wardrobe. You know, it was their clothing that they were wearing in a lot of cases, except when it was, you know, like a uniform, or like Karloff, obviously, with his makeup and stuff. I don't know if that's true or not in all cases, but I know, like, I've heard that Humphrey Bogart, speaking of Maltese Falcon and stuff, you know, that was like his fedora and his suits and stuff that he wore in those things. But yeah, the wardrobe, because you see the peasants and stuff too, and there's this
sometimes it has almost like a medieval kind of thing. The whole the watchtower where Frankenstein set up his laboratory. In the graveyard, this Grim Reaper statue and stuff. There's kind of these hints of like the medieval, but then you see like May Clark and think, oh yeah, it looks like the 30s or something. So it is kind of this nebulous timeline, nebulous place. But so back at the graveyard, they dig up the body and they show up close up of Clive, and he's like kind of almost hugging the casket, saying he's just waiting to wake up or something like that. So, but apparently this body wasn't enough. They needed other parts to make the monster. So they go off and find another kind of medieval contrivance. They find a convict hanging from, I don't know if it's a gibbet, whatever you'd call it, but someone's hung and just swinging there. They didn't bury him. He's just left there as a cautionary tale or whatever. And they cut him down, and Henry Frankenstein says that, his neck's broken, so his brain is no good. And I'm not sure why the corpse in the ground, why that brain's no good, but they have to find a brain. And this whole thing is, from what I understand, a way to introduce the idea of the abnormal criminal brain in the monster and why he's, kind of goes off the deep end, so to speak.
And this, like a couple places in this movie, unfortunately, this sounds bad, and I'll probably raise your ire by mentioning this, but after watching Young Frankenstein numerous times, sometimes it's hard to, because Young Frankenstein Mel Brooks does such a great homage to this film. I mean, obviously he loved this film. There's no question about it. And but the abnormal brain, and then like the thing with Lil Maria, where you're just waiting for the monster to turn to the camera and grin a little bit, right? Those scenes from Young Frankenstein. But it's interesting that they do, and they make no bones about it. This is the bad brain, and that Von Sloan explains to the class, look, you can see because it doesn't have the ridges or this and that. These are the reasons.
Yep. And
although why why Fritz couldn't, why he couldn't have just picked the good brain up off the ground and put it in the other jar, I don't know.
Yeah, it's the 5-second rule on the brain.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But there was that, this bit of like comic relief too, where he's making off with the good brain, and some bell tolls or something that startles him, and he drops it and then grabs the criminal brain instead. And, but that's what I was thinking too. I was like, well, why couldn't he have just slipped it back into the formaldehyde? And
right.
And if it wasn't formaldehyde, right? So I think just being on the ground is going to do anything. But now they have all their component parts to make their monster. And there's throughout the movie too. I mentioned the comic relief. There's these kind of scene changes from the horrible macabre setting of playing God and making this creature and stuff, interspaced with more idyllic moments, or with the Baron, his Frankenstein's father, who's also a little bit comedic, and not purposely so, but he's a little absurd, and like you say, this aristocratic kind of attitude.
Yeah, this movie's a lot like Dracula and the Daughter Dracula, where I don't think anything, I mean, there are little things, kind of sort of comedic moments in this, like the brain part and all, but really everything is played pretty straight in this movie. Yep. Where once we hit Bride, and we're not going to talk about Bride tonight, but once we hit Bride, there's definitely comedic elements put in there, intentional, comedic relief elements, where this one, I don't think they're trying to do that. The other thing this has in common with Dracula is the lack of a score. For the majority of the movie, because at this point in movies they just didn't do scores, or they didn't have the money to do a score, maybe.
This is very early in the talkie phase and stuff, and so it does have both Dracula and the first Frankenstein have a very different feel to them because of the lack of a score. It's that kind of almost menace or something that I don't know. There's a quality about it that sometimes the score can enhance a scene, but sometimes it can take away. Like, so when we get to the creation, with the storm raging and stuff, I mean, that's the best score they could possibly have, I think, is these thunder crashes and stuff and lightning and
the electrical machinery whirling. So the machinery, maybe, a gentleman named Kenneth Strickfaden made and designed all that stuff. He was more like a contractor. He didn't actually work for Universal. So those machines that he made, he kept. And so he set those up and they would use them in future films, but he kept those. And mentioned Young Frankenstein again, when they made that movie, he was still alive and Mel Brooks tracked him down. And so the machines you're seeing in Young Frankenstein, some of those are the exact same ones you see in this movie.
That's cool.
They were in his garage.
Yeah.
His garage.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I'm hoping to this October. I'm kind of hoping to watch like a monster movie every day, or try to. And I'm going to try and watch the Frankenstein franchise. Then I was going to watch a couple of the Hammer Frankensteins and Young Frankensteins on my list too to watch those things. But yeah, that's cool. So in the intervening time between the creation scene and the procurement of the body, we're introduced to some of the other players and stuff, and they collectively share their concerns about Henry's obsessions about first just his closeting himself away in this deserted watchtower, which they inadvertently call a windmill, kind of as a precursor. It's some kind of editing gaffe or something in there, but Elizabeth and Victor go to Waldman with their concerns, and Waldman shares how Frankenstein, while he was in the university, became kind of obsessed with these more macabre and unsavory practices, and was kind of lobbying to have human cadavers available to practice on and stuff, rather than just like animals and stuff.
Right.
So the three of them decide to go and pay a visit to Frankenstein, just to try and find out if he's okay and talk him out of this crazy scheme and stuff.
Well, there's an intervention, right? I mean, effectively, is what they're doing.
Yep.
Really, they're going to, because Elizabeth wants to bring him back, regardless. You know, and but of course they pick of all the nights they pick to get there.
Right, is the big night. Yep. And they're and Henry and Fritz have just gone through the rigmarole of setting up they've completed the making the body. They've got Karloff strapped to the table. You haven't seen Karloff, you've just seen him under the sheet and bandages on this table, and they start up all the contraptions. Sparks fly in a test run, and meanwhile the storm starts raging, and Henry says, at the height of the storm in 15 minutes or so we'll bring him to life. And just then, boom, 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 someone's knocking on the door of the tower, and it's the trio come for the intervention.
Yep.
And at first they try and send them away. He sends Fritz down to shoo them away, and he tries, but they are persistent and call out Henry's name. And when he realizes it's Elizabeth, they let them in from the storm, because they're obviously in some kind of distress in this huge storm. And he brings them up to the laboratory, and Victor says something, makes a comment of, "You're mad." And of course Frankenstein takes offense to that, and we'll see who's mad in the morning. And So they basically bear witness to the creation scene. They raise the monster up on this slab up above and up above the roof with the storm raging. And I'm not really sure. I guess there's more art to this than science, because there's no like timer or any kind of. How does he know when the monster's done? When his like internal thermometer pops up like a turkey or something, but they lower him back down, and then there's a close up of Karloff's hand, and it just starts, wriggling just a tiny bit, and that's when Colin Clive goes into "It's alive! It's alive!"
Yep,
he knows how God feels and stuff. So
yeah, great performance by on his part, and it really is it's still today. One thing about this is they've got the pacing better in this. Like when we talked about Dracula's still a great movie and still very watchable. But I think this one, and because this has a little more expressionism, or that's not the right word, it's filmed more like with expressionists, some of the ideals and some of the Dutch angles, and like the design of the sets and things, even more so than what they did with Dracula. I think this one's feels a little more, even with the lack of soundtrack, because I never miss a soundtrack in this movie. Like I don't, if I don't actively think about it, I don't even notice that there's no sound, no music to it. And I think this plays. You could put a modern viewer in front of this, and I think it would still keep their attention pretty well. To be honest, so there are a lot of older movies that don't, but I think this one still will. It moves on at a pretty good clip the whole time.
Mm-hmm. So the next big scene, I think, is probably just the reveal of the monster, right?
Yeah, which is it's one of the all-time classic reveals. It's so good. Yeah, and it's techniques that I don't know if I've seen those kind of techniques before. Where so you hear the monster coming initially, right? You hear the footsteps in the hallway, and they're keeping him in the dark, which they don't really explain why. But these turn off the lights, and the monster. The door opens and he backs into the room. Yeah. And then the monster turns around, and then we do, it'd be a zoom shot today. Yeah. A zoom, but this is like, I don't know what it would be. Is they're but it jumps. They're quick cut shots, I guess. But but effectively zooms in on the monster's face, right? Yeah. And it's just very well done. It really is.
It is, and then they. Colin Clive has an obsession with making people sit in this.
Yeah, he does.
he tells the monster to sit, and the monster has some rudimentary understanding of language. He doesn't have the capability to vocalize himself, but he has an understanding. So he sits, and then they open up the skylight to slowly let in the sun, and Karloff has this moment where he's, reaching up to heaven, almost like I've heard people say, almost like he's imploring the Almighty to give him a soul or something, but or looking on the face of God, in this whole.
I was going to ask you about this. Yeah, because I mean, I've heard on the. I didn't watch all the film commentaries. I zipped forward to this spot to see what they said about this spot. One of the film commentaries said, "Oh, there's good light and bad light. The torches being bad light, and the sunlight being good light." But there's more to it than that. And I didn't know if you'd read any. That's interesting. The idea of reaching towards God for a soul. But obviously, there's symbology going on here. There's a reason he's reaching up like that.
Yeah,
I'd love to read I'll have to keep researching that. I'd love to read an actual what they were thinking. When they wrote that scene.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be really interesting to kind of have some kind of insight into who made the decisions on some of these things and what the ideas behind them were.
Yeah, because Henry shuts him right down. He's, oh no, it's okay. Shut the skylight now. Sit down now. That's enough. You've had enough. And this is where Karloff's acting is so great, because you see his face and he's crestfallen. His hands are shaking. Reaching out, like, please, can I have more? And it's so good.
Yeah. Yeah, Karloff is really good on this. So then,
Fritz comes in with a
Fritz
torch.
comes in with a torch. So that's the beginning of the end.
Yeah.
So yeah, the bad light, I guess.
But here we finally get an answer. Long-term listeners to Down in the Heap know that we've gone in the past. There's been this rabbit hole about the origin of the judo chop, and the question about where did this start? Because we see Cannon using the judo chop, and we went back to World War II, but now we see that really that this is learned by professors at universities in Eastern Europe, because Van Sloan takes the monster out with the judo chop.
Takes him down.
The monster's going crazy. He's throwing people around. Van Sloan gets behind him and just whack, judo chop right to the back of the neck and takes him right down.
Yep, down in a heap. Yep. So then they, because the monsters popped a bolt, they have to chain him up in the dungeon, because what else do you do with a monster, right? Yep. So he's chained up there, and the sadistic Fritz is very very happy to torment the monster, not only with a whip but with a torch. And the monster's quite pitiable in this. You have kind of a definite empathy for the monster, as this, as Fritz. I don't know. So Fritz is played as a hunchback. I think they call him a dwarf in
the script. The early script, they called him a dwarf. I know. Yeah. I don't know.
He's got the little miniature cane.
Yeah, he does. And the scene where the intervention party shows up, and he's, because initially he doesn't let them in. He opens the little slit in the door and says, "Go away." And then but when Elizabeth calls to Victor comes down the stairs. But when he goes back up the stairs, he has a little cane and he stops and he pulls the sock up.
Yeah,
it's going up.
What do you think? What do you think Fritz's motives are to being the assistant? I mean, is it just it's his meal tickets, or? Maybe. What do you think he got paid?
Maybe he got paid and he got to torture things, I guess. Victor obviously let him break. The implication, even Van Sloan's implication, is that that Henry, the Frankenstein, wanted to almost to get live bodies, and he didn't care new fresh bodies, didn't care where they came from. And obviously we see when we go to Bride, we see this we actually see it on film, the realization of that, how far they're willing to go. But I don't know. But the funny thing, or not the funny thing, but the fitting thing is the way that Fritz goes out, and we talk about the symbology and all that in there. We go back to your Gibbet, your hangman.
Yep. Because he goes too far, and they up in the laboratory, Waldman, who's now kind of assisting, or at least hanging around the tower with Frankenstein, they hear a horrible shrieking and come down and find the monster kind of almost in a sedate kind of state, almost like childish or something, like he knows he's done something wrong, but he's throttled Fritz and hung him up. I don't know if he's some kind of meat hook or something, or if he's actually hanging or what.
Yeah, well, you just see him in silhouette. Yeah.
Yep. You just see a silhouette of him hanging there. So Fritz is kaput. Right. And then Henry basically just kind of has a breakdown then, right?
So the monster breaks out.
That's right. He's loose. That's right. I forgot about that.
And they fight. They're able to sedate him. They're a really heavy sedative. Yep. And of course, this just happens to be coincidentally the time Baron Frankenstein shows up, because he thinks that Henry's got another woman and he's cheating on Elizabeth.
Right.
And Victor comes in. Victor helps him drag the monster back in the cell before the Baron
before
gets
they
inside.
let his father in. Yep.
Yeah, and by the time they get upstairs, they send Henry upstairs to wash the blood off. I don't know if he has blood. I think he has blood from where the monster hit him. I think it had blood coming out of his mouth. But he went upstairs to wash the blood off, and when they get up there, he has that nervous breakdown.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then so Waldman says he'll take care of the monster for him or whatever. So Waldman straps Karloff, the monster, to the table. He's gonna dissect him. I don't know why he just doesn't kill him to begin with, but he wants him for alive for some reason. And of course, Karloff, the monster, comes to in the process, and you see his eyes flutter and stuff, and then Waldman's bending over him to make an incision or something, and Karloff's arm comes around and grabs him by the back of the neck. So he throttles Waldman and then lurches down the stairs of the watchtower, comes to the door, and doesn't really seem to know how it works, which, you also see that when he walks in backwards, that in the entry scene. But then he gets out and he's loose in the countryside. And we have the scene with Frankenstein basically recovering now at his home, right? Mm-hmm. In the care of Elizabeth. So we have one of these idyllic scenes, and they're planning their wedding.
Right.
And the monster is meanwhile wandering on the countryside and comes across a farmstead. And it's the setup where the little girl is am I getting ahead of myself? No. I don't think so.
Yeah.
So the girl's father is going to town for the wedding, and
well, he's going to check his traps. He's a woodsman and hunter.
And then they're going to go to the wedding after he checks all that stuff.
Yeah, she has her cat, and she asks him to play with her, and he says, "No, I can't play with you. Play with the cat." And then the monster shows up, and
the monster shows up, and she's not, for once, someone's not afraid of the monster. He finds a friendly soul, and he sits down and plays with her. They have flowers, and they're start flinging them into the lake right next to them. And Karloff, the monster, is overjoyed at this, seeing these flowers float and stuff. And when he runs out of flowers, naturally he wants to see if the girl floats or something, and flings her into the lake.
Yep.
And then,
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
We were probably going to go to the same place here. So, interestingly enough, this makeup that we talk about is so great. It unnerved people enough. He wasn't allowed to eat in the cafeteria there at the Universal set because it unnerved people, and it actually, scared people, I guess, or But this little girl, and they were really worried when the actress that played Little Maria first met him, because they're worried she'd be terrified of him. But apparently, she ran up to him and just took his hand right away. It was like, because they had to drive away from the set out in the country to film that scene, and she asked if she could ride with him and all that. So, yeah, interesting enough, she, the actress wasn't afraid of him either. We're adults, which kind of goes back a little bit of segue. I don't know. You've listened to commentaries and read some books related to this. They're the stories that people passed out watching this movie, and this has that famous opening where the guy comes out of the curtain in the very beginning,
Van Sloan,
and gives the warning, right?
Yep.
And we've heard this on other, more contemporary, like The Exorcist. There's stories. You can watch news report. You can find them and go watch YouTube. You can watch news stories of people passing out and throwing up during The Exorcist, right?
Yep.
But supposedly people passed out during this. I don't know if they did, or if that was publicity stunt Universal pulled. But from everything I can tell, some people probably actually did.
Yeah.
Like legitimately did pass out during this.
Yeah, and this scene of the little girl getting thrown in the lake too. This, even though we're kind of like pre-code, there were still regional censorships and stuff. So this did get edited out in some of the areas. This scene, as did the whole Colin Clive thing, talking about playing God and stuff.
Right.
I know what it's like to be God and stuff. So,
yeah.
And so I read a book where the author interviewed this actress that played Little Maria. And apparently she was kind of a child actress. Her mother was according to this person, I think it was her stepmother, was a theater mom or whatever, was kind of riding on the coattails of the proceeds of this little girl, and she was kept on a continual diet, so she was always hungry. And when they first threw her in the lake, she had so much, petticoats and all these, the costume just didn't permit her to swim underwater out to some rowboats just out of camera. So she couldn't actually go underwater. So they had to throw her in again. So they had to wait for her to dry off and stuff. And James Whale, apparently, to kind of try and coax the kid to do it again, said, I'll give you anything you want if we, can film this scene again. And she said that she wanted a dozen hard-boiled eggs. And her stepmother was so angry with her that she didn't ask for something valuable.
Right.
But James Whale apparently gave her 24 hard-boiled eggs to retake the scene.
Wow. but it gives you an idea that the difference in the times, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's
yep.
Yeah.
So what
so
do we see then?
So the monster's thrown her. So prior to that, or right around that same time, we're seeing all the preps because we're cutting back and forth. We're seeing the wedding preps are going on. We cut back and forth, and we see the Baron goes out on his. He tells everybody, "Oh, as long as they have beer, they're happy." And there's enough beer for everybody, and he's giving champagne to the servants, and everybody's happy. And then well, there's two things that happen now. You have, I guess the next thing is Elizabeth's premonition, probably, right?
Yeah.
So she comes to Victor before the wedding, in her dress, and tells him, we need to talk, you may have seen this more recently than I have, but effectively she has this premonition that something bad's going to happen and come between them.
Yep.
I don't remember her exact words, but.
No, it's essentially that. She just has this feeling of dread, and of course, you know who it is. The wedding is going on. It's shortly after. I think it's before the premonition scene that the. What's the father's of the little girl of Maria's?
Oh, he doesn't show up till after the monster comes in the house, I don't think. Ludwig is the actor is Michael Mark.
Okay.
It's around the same time, but because she has a premonition.
Yeah.
And then they hear the noise.
Yep. They hear and they jump to the conclusion that the monsters come and it's in the house.
Yeah. So Victor locks her in the bedroom.
Yep.
Victor.
Really,
Henry locks her in the bedroom.
Yep.
Because there is a Victor, but different. Yeah. Victor is the man of honor, right?
Yep.
Yes. Or best man. I'm sorry. He's the best man.
Yep.
And but anyway, so they're running around the house looking for the monster. The monster, of course, goes in the bedroom where Elizabeth is. She screams, and they all run back down there. Henry has to unlock the door. The monster runs out. There's all this because I think all the people are already there in front of the Burgomeister when Maria's father walks up with the child.
Yeah,
with Maria, he's like, she's drowned. He's like, well, why did you bring her to me? No, she's been murdered. And
right
now, how they know the monster did it, I don't know if that's ever answered.
Yeah, they just seem happy to blame everything on the monster. But again, poor Maria, the little actress. It's quite an extended scene where the father's walking through the streets with this little girl, and she's just playing it like a trooper. She's just lying limp in his arms with her head lolling back and her legs splayed out and stuff. It must have been pretty painful for this little kid,
right?
And who knows how many takes they did on it.
Well, it's interesting you say that, and maybe we'll hit this later, but I don't know if Whale had a sadistic streak in him or what.
It sounds like he did.
Because he did something similar here at the end of the movie, but I guess maybe we'll hold that for the finale here. But
so so the monster has and just before we pick it up again, your point about people being unsettled by the makeup of the monster. Even Mae Clark, the actress, was apprehensive around Karloff like that, to the point where she was, kind of jokingly saying that I won't need to act to be frightened when Karloff is, in her boudoir, like trying to attack her. And Boris said, "I'll just wiggle my little finger."
I remember that story. Yeah,
So,
that's right.
So it's me.
And apparently, I didn't even think to look for that last time I watched it. I don't know if you can actually see him doing it or not.
Yeah, I'll watch for that too, and the next time I watch it.
But I remember hearing that because it's just me. But it's weird. You think about nowadays. I mean, obviously we're very callous, and this is
Jaded.
almost definitely. I mean, we're almost 100 years after this, but
it's 90 years.
Yeah. It's 90 years this year. You're right.
Yep.
And but just the idea of somebody in that makeup would really scare somebody when it's
right.
You know who it is. It's just makeup. But
yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So the monster hasn't killed Elizabeth. He's just given her quite a shock, and she's swooned and fainted on the divan or something. And but she's out of sorts, and they have to delay the wedding. And when the death of the little girl comes about, then now it's business time. We need to hunt down the monster. So it's
right.
Here we go. Is this the first instance of like bringing out the pitchforks and the torches and hunting down the monster, or is this, or were there scenes in other movies like that?
I want to say it's not, but it might be. It
might be the first talkie that has it.
It may be the first talkie that has it. I don't remember.
I'm not very.
It may be. It's the first
silent.
Yeah, I think it's the first Universal film that does it. I'm trying to think if there's any scenes. It's been a long time since I've seen Phantom of the Opera. Is there any scene like at the end of Phantom? I don't remember.
Or Hunchback, maybe.
Yeah, see, I just don't. It's been too long since I've seen those. I don't remember.
Yeah.
But it's definitely the first of this series where we see it.
Yeah.
We will see it again in other ones, but this is the first time.
Yeah,
we see
it becomes one of the tropes of the Universal monster movies, especially in the Frankenstein movies of the torch wielding mob hunting down the monster. And Frankenstein and the Burgomaster and
Maria's father leads one mob.
Yep, Maria's
Burgomaster leads one, and Henry Frankenstein leads one. But mind you, one thing Henry Frankenstein never does in this whole movie is accept blame for. I mean, he admits blame personally. You hear him say "poor Fritz" or this or that, but he never publicly admits what he's done, or you never hear him telling. But I guess maybe he tells Van Sloan, but he never tells anybody else. The
villagers don't make any connection between the monster and Frankenstein.
No, and because the monster's never called Frankenstein in this movie. Whenever they say Frankenstein, they're talking about Henry. They're talking about the man, the son of the Baron.
Yeah, it's
the whole time.
It's after this that it's confounded where the monster becomes Frankenstein or whatever. So or Frankenberry if.
That's right. Rob's holding up his box of Frankenberry.
Yeah, my box of Frankenberry. I wish I could have some. So the hunting parties go off into the night to hunt down the monster, and Frankenstein is leading the group into the hills and mountains, and there's some nice what are those back screen
the matte paintings and
matte paintings and stuff. Yeah, so there's some pretty cool visuals and stuff. So it's a pretty cool night scene that they pull off.
These movies all do a really great job of mixing the actual sets and the matte paintings in the background, and I think this one is really effective. A couple of them are, but like the windmill isn't all practical, you know, in some of these things, but they look really good.
Yep.
They really do. The fact it's black and white no doubt helps, but it
right.
you know, really does look good.
And the watchtower is pretty evocative too and stuff. But
yes. Oh yeah.
So Frankenstein, the monster, is lying in wait, and he, I think he first,
he kills somebody before he meets Henry.
Yeah,
they come across the guy. Yeah, he's not dead yet when they come across him.
Yeah, and then he is somehow Frankenstein gets separated from the rest of his party. He's trying to beckon them to come and follow him, but they go off following where the dog is leading them. And Frankenstein is lying in wait, and they have a little bit of a melee, and it's clear that Frankenstein is a 0 level character, and the monster is a 6 or 7 hit die creature, and takes out Frankenstein pretty quickly.
That's right. Frankenstein doesn't know the judo chop. He should have. He left the university before he learned that.
That was the master course.
That's right. But this takes us to that scene where we talk about whether Whale was, you know, kind of a sadist. So you have the scene of Karloff as the monster carrying Victor up these stairs, or Henry. It's hard, but yeah, he's carrying him up the stairs. But I've heard, or I've read that he made Karloff do that up to 12 times.
Yep.
And this may be the final thing that, I mean, it sounds cliche, but broke his back. But I mean, you know, actually did do the real bad damage to Karloff's spine, where he had to get that surgery.
He was actually carrying. They didn't have a stunt man or anything, even though they could have. Where they showed the monster carrying Clive, or they could have had a dummy, you know, in the long shot where the monster's carrying up the hillside to the windmill. But no, Whale insisted. And I forgot to mention something that draws these two scenes together. So in the interim, when they were trying to when they were waiting for the costume to dry out and stuff, and persuading Maria, the actress that played Maria, to go in the lake again, Karloff was leading a little bit of a revolt, saying, well, why does the monster even need to kill her? Maybe we should redo the scene. And Whale was very upset with this. And it was also kind of Karloff by this time had become quite popular on the set too. And it's the author of this book I was reading has kind of makes this makes this connection where he feels like Whale was becoming quite jealous of Karloff.
I've heard that. I've also heard, and I have no idea how valid any of these rumors are.
Right.
I've heard that rumor. I've heard the rumor that they at one time were lovers, and Whale was jealous of Karloff for that reason. And again, I don't know, because I haven't read any biographies of either. I haven't even watched. I guess I need to. They did the movie with who was it? Ian.
Ian McKellen. Gods and Monsters.
Gods and Monsters. I haven't seen that. I've heard that's
pretty good.
But,
it's a good movie. It's definitely worth watching.
I'll have to do that.
They don't really dig into any of that that I can. I mean, they definitely make there's a lot of reference to the movie Frankenstein, but it's it focuses more on the relationship, or just Whale's life at that time, and his relationship with this gardener played by Brendan Fraser.
Okay.
The guy from the Mummy movies.
Yeah.
The new Mummy movies.
Right. But for some reason, Whale seems to have had it out for Karloff.
Right.
And he made him redo that. And he was wearing the full make. So, each boot's 13 pounds. He's got these stiffeners. He's carrying, Colin Clive, who's a bigger, heavier man than Karloff is. So he's got all this stuff on. Plus, he's carrying a heavier guy than him up these stairs. Up to a dozen times. I mean, it's it's crazy.
And maybe all this, his mistreatment on this film, is part of the reason why Karloff was quite an activist in forming the Screen Actors Guild.
Well, he was a founding member.
Yep. So, but so the monster brings Frankenstein into this mill, trying to escape the mob. Frankenstein comes to as the monster is kind of railing against the mob out a window and stuff, and they have that one scene like you were saying where they show the mechanism of the windmill grinding or whatever, and so it's this kaleidoscope almost effect separating the monster and whale. And they have a couple close-ups of them, but I think Frankenstein gets knocked out again, right? And
he does. Well, because he tries to crawl away. They tussle. I think he gets knocked. Although he's conscious there at the end, he might get knocked out for a minute there. But they end up fighting out on the outside of the windmill. Yeah, effectively where people can see them. The crowd below can see them. And he
picks them up. Fireman carry, airplane spin, belly to belly suplex. No, that doesn't happen. But he does throw him off the balcony onto the sails of the windmill. Right. And it's clearly a dummy, but he just kind of lands on the sail and then slides off, and then the mob goes crazy and lights the windmill on fire, and it catches pretty quickly. But
it does, and it's a really effective scene. The terror Karloff shows of being trapped in this burning windmill. By this time he's killed, and regardless of your feelings of the monster, even if it's hard not to feel bad for him at that point. Yeah, because Karloff really portrays the terror, and you see him running back and forth and trying to find a way out. Then he gets trapped under a beam, and it's a really, even today it's a really moving scene. It's very well done.
It is, and that was supposed to be the end of the film. But,
it was, yeah.
But there was kind of a change of heart about making a happier ending. So even though it looked like Frankenstein was dead, and even Colin Clive thought his character was dead, but they filmed a sequence afterwards where they in a long shot, they don't even have Mae Clarke and Colin Clive in the scene. They have two actors in the background, but it's not them, and it's just the Baron and some of his staff toasting the health of the future son of Frankenstein.
Right. Yeah. Which is so. Yeah. Because originally it was, but yeah. The toast is here's to a son. Yeah. Here's to a son to the house of Frankenstein, which obviously could be, have double meanings, right? Because the studio probably knew they had a hit by this time, but you're right. When they filmed it, it was that way, definitely. And then during pre-screenings, because of the feedback they got, they decided to add that. And they added the intro with Van Sloan also. Yeah. That was also filmed afterwards. Yep. Those two were add-ons, which I think was smart on their part.
Yeah. And it was released to much acclaim. It became a overnight box office smash. I think it opened in the Midwest in like Detroit and I can't remember for Chicago, but it didn't play on the coast until several weeks after that because they didn't want the critics to potentially savage it before before it got some revenue or something. But it was Karloff was acclaimed as kind of the next Lon Chaney, and which I think wasn't Bela Lugosi kind of. He was the star and had refused the role of Frankenstein, and now Karloff becomes the universal star.
Right, and Karloff keeps that because even though we see Bela Lugosi and other things, I don't think he ever, aside from joking aside, I was gonna make a joke and I brain fart. What's the magician he plays in the serials?
Oh,
he wears the turban and he's the, he's like a mystic.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm doggone it. I'll think of it here in a minute.
Yeah, I can't remember it.
But honestly, Dracula's Bela Lugosi's high point, right?
Yep.
Really.
Yep.
Where Karloff, and this is Karloff's high point probably, but Karloff was still given many more leading roles and many more major roles. And Lugosi was, in fact, Lugosi later on did play the monster. Because Karloff would only play did he only play in The Bride? I think he stopped playing the monster pretty quickly. I think The Bride, he might have only played it twice.
Yeah, I think it was just The Bride.
Yeah, and then Lon Chaney Jr. filled in, and Glenn Strange filled in, and Lugosi at one point. Yeah. But yeah, Lugosi really, Dracula was his prime.
Yeah,
which Shantu, darn it, I'm gonna look it up. I'm sorry. Anyway, but yeah, it's interesting that between this and Dracula, these are the two prototypes. These built the House of Universal, right? Or the horror films, because the success of these two, they kept on going.
Mm-hmm.
But
definitely. And some people, a lot of critics feel that Bride is the better movie than the original Frankenstein.
Right,
and
which is something we'll discuss next time, I guess. But yeah, I don't know that we'll have that discussion next time, because I think there's there are good things and then you have the forced humor and some other things as well.
Yep.
So I don't know if it's.
I can think of one character if they had removed from Bride of Frankenstein, then it would probably be superior for me. But Karloff becomes Karloff. Like, you see these movie posters, I've got some, and he's like a one name.
Right. Well, yeah, in Bride,
Karloff.
He's billed as Karloff.
Yep.
In The Bride, he's he's billed as just Karloff.
Yep. And he's billed as like Karloff the Uncanny. And much like Lon Chaney was the man of 1,000 faces. And
well, and you look at that, like we talk about their later years, but Karloff, he went on to do TV. Even I mentioned the Corman movie, but he was in Corman movies. He was in The Raven. He was in, he was in a number of those kind of things. So
I think he did some movies for RKO too.
Yeah, he did a bunch. Chandu the magician, or Chandu the magician. That's I can't.
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry, I had to go down that. I will warn you before we next time we meet and we do The Bride and talk about that Una O'Connor is voted as a 19th out of all time. Una O'Connor, who plays Minnie, is the 19th most beloved actor from Ireland. Actress from Ireland. So I'll warn you before you call her out as your least favorite part of that movie.
All right. To all my Irish listeners, I'll apologize in advance.
I kind of knew you were going to go there, so I figured I'd mention that.
I'm shocked that you picked up on who I'd have a problem with. But so that's Frankenstein. Possibly the best Universal monster movie. I have a real soft spot for The Mummy too. Those are my two favorites, and Bride is right there with it. But
it's hard to say, because they all have their high points, right? Because the Wolfman too is so iconic, even though it doesn't, and even the Invisible Man, although it doesn't stand up with these. When you think about the special effects. Yeah. When in The Invisible Man, when he takes off those bandages the first time and you see through him, and you're thinking it's a movie in the 30s,
right?
And it works. The special effects just work in that movie,
And Claude Rains was great in it. So
and you talk about, well, these are monsters. I mean, The Invisible Man's a mass murderer. He kills like over 100 people in that movie. Well, if you add up all the people on the train, he derails. But so, but. Yeah, say Frankenstein, because even as a little kid I used to watch. He's probably my favorite, but I like all these movies. I really do.
I do too.
And even The Creature, with like the underwater sequence, even though The Creature's later, right? Because that was 50s.
In the 50s,
yeah. But the underwater sequences and just some great things.
Yeah. Not to mention Julia Adams, and
Right. Well, we'll talk about recastings, because they recasted a number of roles for Bride. So when we hit that, we can hit that. One thing we didn't talk about, we'll save this for Bride. I think it'll be better. So I was going to bring something up, but I'll make you wait.
All right. Yeah.
I think it's better.
We'll keep the audience on the edge of their seats.
That's right. I will say that some of these other people we saw, though, like the Burgermeister here, we won't see him again in Bride, but we will see him again in other roles in both Son of Frankenstein and Ghost of Frankenstein.
Okay.
The actor that played the Burgermeister.
Yeah, they definitely had kind of a troupe of actors that kind of were interchangeable parts throughout each individual franchise, and as there was crossover between these franchises and the house movies and stuff. And I mean, there's fodder here for if you could do a lot worse with your October than sitting down and watching a bunch of Universal monster movies. I know that's something I plan on doing this October. And in fact, I was thinking about as a possible, especially with the other movies, you know, the cheesy sequels, so there's A-list Universal monster movies, and then there's the B-list, and then it's almost like there isn't a C-list. There just drops the D.
Well, it depends where you put, because when we talked about doing this before,
yeah,
you know, we had each franchise, then we had the team up movies, because this was a shared universe before Marvel ever made a movie. Because House and the two House movies, they're team up movies.
Yeah.
And then you have the Abbott Costello movies, which you know what I heard yesterday? I was listening to a podcast about this, or it wasn't about this, but it was a horror podcast. But do you know what famous singer was inspired and started their singing career because they watched Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein?
Alice Cooper.
Jerry Garcia.
Jerry Garcia, really?
Jerry Garcia, and I haven't independently researched. I'm just assuming this podcaster is being honest in what they said. I've not independently researched this, but apparently Jerry Garcia said he saw Abbott Costello meet Frankenstein, and because this wacky combo was done, it made him believe that anything was possible, and that seriously influenced the music of the Grateful Dead.
I wonder if he was baked when he was watching Abbott and Costello. Well, I mean, it's Jerry Garcia, so unless he was like 10 years old when he saw it, he probably was.
Yeah, I don't know, but the Grateful Dead was inspired in a way. Jerry Garcia was inspired.
That's awesome.
Abbott and Costello. But you think about these things, some of them are definitely D-list, and when you get to the House movies and the later like Invisible Man sequels and Mummy sequels,
the mummy
well, even the Frankenstein ones, they get pretty bad. The House ones, the team up ones are, they're okay. I think the Abbott Costello ones are actually a higher caliber because they're still funny to me, at least. I still find a lot of the jokes funny.
And much as I like The Creature from the Black Lagoon, the two sequels,
they're horrible.
Bad. In fact, one of them was done in Mystery Science Theater, so
they're. but you could definitely do worse than watching the universe, rewatching these movies, or watch them for the first time if you haven't seen them, and then next year move on to the Hammer movies. The Hammer movies but you wouldn't have the Hammer horror movies without these.
Right. Well, and maybe you wouldn't have horror movies without. Well, something would have cropped up. I mean,
because
the foundation had obviously been laid.
Yeah.
The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and
Vampire.
They're Nosferatu.
Right. Yeah. Hexen.
So this. So there was obviously the groundwork had been laid, but these really kind of took it to another level, and not just because it was sound now, but they became a sensation. Well, I suppose just because of technology, just like we see now with things blowing up on YouTube or whatever, or Nerds RPG variety casts. So
I don't know about that, but
it's been great talking to you about Universal Monsters again. I look forward to our next chat about Bride of Frankenstein, and I hope everyone has some time in October to visit some of these old movies. If you're not going to watch this, watch some Hammer movies or watch The Night Stalker. There's a lot of old classic horror movies out there that are just outstanding. So thanks again for joining me tonight, Jason. I look forward to our next chat.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Appreciate being here.
Yep. And until we talk to you again, don't go down in a heap.
Okay, folks, thank you so much for joining me for the rebroadcast to that podcast that Rob from Down the Heap joined me on. I really appreciate him giving me permission to republish that here on the Cerebrivore feed. Next week, we'll be back with the first chapter of our next game book. Until then, be excellent to each other.
A Nerds and Co broadcast, Cerebrivore podcast. Let's savor all the flavors from the spinal tap straw. All styles and pods past, Cerebrivore podcast. You're counting down your last as you admire them all. Something's growing in teeth, or soon escaping your brain. What I mean is this machine's a freak, and from what I understand, that's what it don't look now, the Cerebrivore is coming, and all that's left, crying and the running. You can bring it, you can hide, I'll be above in any order. Just another brain or real tossers running for the border. Just a snack, like a running, can I stutter? Beer and beer, it's very splendid buzz. You can eat on a billion, and it's just as never say it.